Good morning and welcome to the viewing and listening audience to this, the 26th meeting of the Joint Select Committee on Social Services and Public Administration. This is the committee's third public hearing with stakeholders pursuant to our inquiry into the state's response to underperformance in primary and secondary schools and the adequacy of the Student Support Services Division and its impact on school dropouts at the primary and secondary school levels. Members of the public are invited to submit their comments and questions on the Parliament's social media platforms, including YouTube, channel ParlView, or via Facebook and X, formerly Twitter. You can also, at this time, follow us on Instagram and Facebook at TT Committees. That's at TT Committees for real-time updates and highlights on committee meetings and activities. At this time, I'd like to invite who are before us today, informing, I should say, of the entities before us, which we're continuing from our last public inquiry, which include the Trinidad-Tobago Unified Teachers Association tutor, the National Primary Schools Principals Association, and the Association of Principals of Public Secondary Schools. We'd like to also invite members of our committee who are with us today to introduce themselves, starting with, on my right, Member Ford.
Good morning, welcome. Esmond Ford, member.
Member Naked.
Good morning.
Member Singh.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, through you. Thank you, and good morning to all the stakeholders. Avinash Singh, member.
There are members who cannot be with us today, who are also part of the committee, including Member Roger Monroe, Member Penelope Beckles, Member Vandana Mohit, and Member Rohan Sinanan. We thank them for their continued contribution to the committee's work. We'd like to, at this time, invite the entities who are with us to please introduce themselves and their team, starting with Tutor.
Good morning, everyone. With me this morning is my second Vice President, Ms. Marsha Huggins, and I am Martin Lumpkin, representing Tutor.
Thank you. Officials of the National Primary Schools Principals Association.
Good morning, everyone. Monique Scipio-Daniel, representing NAPSPA as its president. And with me, I have Ms. Colleen Hayes, first vice president.
Thank you. And the officials of the Association of Principals of Public Secondary Schools of Trinidad and Tobago.
Good morning, everyone. Charlene Hicks-Rayburn, president of the Association of Principals of Public Secondary Schools. With me, I have our first vice president, Mr. David Simon, and our secretary, Mrs. Patricia Pitt.
Thank you all. This inquiry has four main objectives. One, to assess the current performance levels at key examination checkpoints, including SCA, CSEC, and CAPE. Two, to examine the rates of truancy and school dropouts at the primary and secondary school levels over the past decades. Three, to evaluate the capacity and effectiveness of the Student Support Services Division in providing adequate support and interventions for students, and four, to review and analyze the effectiveness of current strategies aimed at addressing underperformance, truancy, and school dropouts at primary and secondary school levels. If I could be allowed, I'd just like to start by reading some excerpts of a very interesting article that came out. It's an article focused on a World Bank report on Caribbean education that I'm sure many of you would have had sight of already. It's published in the Barbados Today newspaper on the 18th of February, and it is written by Sharida Braffett. And I'm just going to read some excerpts which puts into context the importance of this inquiry for us in Trinidad and Tobago, but certainly has wider implications for the Caribbean. And I quote, "The World Bank has delivered a damning verdict on the Caribbean education system, labeling it as being in a state of crisis and warning of severe consequences if urgent reforms are not implemented. During a virtual webinar on Monday, senior officials of the International Financial Institution, World Bank, laid bare the systemic inadequacies plaguing Caribbean schools, highlighting outdated teaching practices, ill-equipped infrastructure, and widening educational inequalities. They stressed the need for significant financial investment and enhanced teacher support to reverse the region's educational decline." The World Bank Country Director for the Caribbean, Lila Buransik, did not mince words as she described a dire state of affairs, and I'm quoting from her delivery now, open quotations: "We are confronting a crisis that is jeopardizing the future of the Caribbean, a crisis in education." She said it may sound dramatic, but the impact on education is so critical, and systems are failing. Indeed, this constitutes a crisis. We must ask ourselves to answer questions about how we can strengthen foundational skills in literacy, numeracy, and critical thinking to improve learning outcomes. The World Bank's scathing assessment pinpointed numerous flaws within the Caribbean's education system. In a detailed analysis, Victoria Levin, senior economist at the World Bank Education Global Practice, cited outdated teaching methods, inadequate infrastructure, severe disparities in education access as key contributors to the region's educational underperformance. Teaching practices in the Caribbean are still quite traditional, focused on rigid curricula that do not meet the needs of 21st century learners. Levin said teachers lack the necessary support to adapt their instructional methods, incorporate social emotional skills, or assist students with special educational needs. Additionally, some countries lack professional standards for teacher recruitment and deployment, leaving inexperienced educators struggling in the classroom. Consequently, classroom time is not utilized effectively, hindering students' knowledge and skill acquisition. I'll go down the article. It also says, Ms. Levin, that is, quote, "The elite secondary schools maintain their privileged status through highly selective admission processes based on standardized entrance exam. This serves as a sorting mechanism with lifelong consequences for students. Meanwhile, the rest of the secondary school system fails to deliver the necessary competencies, perpetuating social inequities." The World Bank also condemned the region's inadequate provision for special education, citing a lack of reliable data, insufficient specialized schools, and a shortage of qualified teachers. She pointed to a rigid curricula that failed to accommodate diverse learning needs and highlighted the absence of essential facilities such as accessible toilets and ramps. And I'll end on this part. Special education remains under-prioritized, with missing policies and procedures for transitional students in and out of special education. They also said students who fall behind in early grades on foundational skills are unable to master more advanced competencies later on. This is evident in CSEC exam results, where less than 80% of students passed English and fewer than half passed math, even among better performing students. She also expressed concern about declining parental engagement. Now, that is quite a damning indictment, and that's just part of the report from the World Bank. So I think it contextualizes the importance of these kinds of discussions. Many of the points we've raised already over and over and over, many of the points you have raised over and over and over, and it seems that Trinidad and Tobago is not exclusive in the challenges being faced in education. And if we are to be competitive as a region, as a civilization, these issues must be addressed not only locally, but regionally. So we thank you for being with us today. Let me allow Mr. Lumpkin to deliver opening remarks, brief opening remarks on behalf of his team.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Richards, it is an honor and privilege to be before the JSC this morning to look at the education system in Trinidad and Tobago. The report which you would have just cited, Tutor is on record over the years of seeing a number of what has been said. And it is our hope that we can improve the education system and by extension, improve Trinidad and Tobago, this beloved country. The education system is the backbone by which the country can move forward. Education is a vehicle for many underprivileged persons, children, to get out of that cycle of poverty. And we at Tutor, although looking at the rights of our members, we also have that special privilege of looking at the rights of our children as well too. And we are hopeful that the findings of this Joint Select Committee can move some way forward in improving Trinidad and Tobago and the education system. Thank you.
Sorry, Mrs. Monique Scipio Daniel. of the President of the National Primary Schools Principals Association. Next, please.
Good morning, Dr. Richards and members of the panel. NAPSPA is indeed very grateful for the opportunity to be a part of this JSC. We wish to bring the voices of the principals to the JSC and to the general public. The article that you read is indeed quite worrisome, and many of the statements made within there we have also cited in our report, and we do hope that the discussion is going to be a fruitful one, but not just fruitful, but we are able to implement some of the measures recommended for improvement of the schools. We want to make sure that our children grow spiritually, morally, educationally, academically, and our teachers are also encouraged to grow professionally so that we can make a difference in the lives of our children. The children are the future of the nation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mrs. Scipio Daniel, and Mrs. Charlene Hicks Rayburn, President of the Association of Principals of Public Secondary Schools, please.
Good morning, Chairman, and good morning to the panel. And the Association of Principals of Public Secondary Schools is indeed grateful for the opportunity to be here. And as one of the major stakeholders in the education system, we recognize the importance of this collaboration. We recognize the importance of dialogue. We recognize the importance of us being honest with the reality of what it is. And it is not a very nice picture, unfortunately. But we are not alone in this, the crisis which befalls the education system. It is beyond our shores. It is something that is going beyond the region. We see, in fact, that there are a lot of changes that we have to come to terms with, and we have to recognize that post-pandemic, the traditional mode of education as we know it has in fact changed, and we have to be realistic in what is necessary for what is of benefit to us as a country, what is important for us, for our children, in terms of what is necessary for the 21st century child and the type of child we have, and the importance of the parental support as well to the success of our education system. But more than ever, I want to stress the importance of us being really honest as to the reality. It doesn't sound good, what was read, and that article is quite a scathing attack on our system, but it is not beyond remedy. We have the answers. There needs to be a greater investment in the education system. There needs to be greater training, and there needs to be a lot more in terms of collaboration on this front. So we look forward to the discussion today.
Thank you so much. I'm going to go off script, much to the chagrin of the Secretariat, because we really can't discount this article coming at this time. And we will certainly jump into your submissions and the issues that came out of those. But, you know, we've had so much discussion as a country about the pros and the cons of our education system. It's not that our education system doesn't produce good people, scholars, people who can contribute productively in a holistic assessment. It's not all bad, but there are significant gaps that we've spoken about for decades in this country. Decades that we don't seem to be able to be making the kind of progress on. And then the pandemic hit the world and exacerbated and showed those ugly cracks even more, as we're seeing today. That there have been some mechanisms attempted to remedy the situation, but they don't seem to have addressed the basic issues. And I want to start by talking about this statement, which is one of the ones that struck me the most, because it really speaks to the levels of fragmentation and stratification that the kind of system that we continue to perpetuate breeds in societies where, and I'm quoting, the elite secondary schools remain their privileged status or maintain their privileged status through highly selective admission processes. And down to the end of that, failing to deliver the necessary competencies and perpetuating social inequity. that is the kind of statement that tells you exactly what we've been talking about for years with the prestige school versus government secondary school situation. And we have examples of how schools can be run well. We have examples, ironically, where the state is in control of a certain cadre of schools, and those schools have stars that perform well, but for the most part underperform when you compare them to the denominational schools. So I want to start by asking, why has this situation persisted? Why have we not been able to make some sort of inroads in equalizing the playing field? Is it that the societal structure maintains it because we like it that way, we accept it as a country? Or is it that there's some fundamental things from your experience in the education sector that we are not addressing or unwilling to address effectively to equalize that playing field to the benefit of the whole country moving forward with a better education system, producing a different kind of citizen in an egalitarian way? I'll start with Mr. Lumpkin on that.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And I want to agree with you in one of the statements, but there are many other factors which contribute to this inequality in our system. So there are persons who will benefit from, or entities that benefit from this level of stratification. A lot of people will continue the status quo because a lot of people like the recognition that they are performing and they are doing what is necessary. The idea, though, as well, of this entrance examination, where you move from primary to secondary school, is one of the factors. It is a placement exam, and we're all aware within the Education Act, it allows for parents to choose the schools to which they want their child to go. In having to place these children into schools, you are now basically separating what they say, sheep from goat. And there are a number of schools who have established, whether by way of the staff working hard or the mere fact that you are bringing students who are of a certain performance academically together, and then you are putting those who are seemingly underperforming based upon that benchmark. And when you separate these students, now it's not entirely all the same, because within the denominational schools, because of the concordat, they're allowed to choose 20%. And that is another area that we have to really look at. And the denominational boards will always fight for their, well, supposedly right over the years to have that 20%. But when you are now putting the so-called high achievers in one school, what do you expect of them? And then you are getting the resources from the Past People's Association, alumni, etc., which are going to contribute to the performance of the child. When certain persons of financial status can also invest in their children, then this is what is going to happen. And then those are the other spectrum who are not performing. You are lumping them into one school, and you are not giving them the type of resources in order to bring them to a certain level, functional literacy. And then when you look at the technical vocational education and training, which has been languishing over the years, and children who may be more inclined to go into this field, you are not providing the enabling process for them as well too. Teacher training is another area we can get into, and tutors have spoken as well about a clear career path for our educators. We really don't have a clear career path for our educators. What is happening in the system at this time? Persons would go to the tertiary education, and while waiting for placement in whatever field, they look to get into teaching. Some will stay in the teaching and get to love it, but some are just passing through as well. When you look at the report that spoke about delivery methods and so. To get into the primary system now, you have to do the Bachelor's of Education, although the minimum qualification is still 5 O-levels, and the teachers, not diploma, but the teachers, that education advancement. But right now, it is not available. So the Ministry and Teaching Service Commission is accepting only Bachelor's of Education. What is taking place at those tertiary levels to improve, to have our educators now be able to utilize the latest in educational delivery, right? So it begs those questions along that line. But really and truly, there are persons who are benefiting from education as it is right now. It is a big business, and we have to recognize that it is a big business, and persons would not want that to vary because it would affect them. And it's also political as well, too.
Thank you. Mrs. Scipio Daniel, as president of the Primary Schools Principals Association, because the primary school level is the foundation after ECCE, why do you think the status quo with these inequalities and these structures that perpetuate inequalities continue? We've had these discussions for decades. I know you've had these discussions yourself in your organization, but we don't seem to, as a country, be able to deal with moving it forward.
Thank you, Chair. The thing is, I believe it is really very systematic, and as Mr. Lumpkin would have said, a bit political and a bit of a financial benefit for several persons. Now, when we look at the SCA, which is a placement exam, we have, as I would have been explaining to Mr. Lumpkin just before we came in here, I used to teach an SCA class for several years. At that point, it was simply a placement exam. Children wrote the exams and they passed for the school of their choice, or if not, they were sent to a school in their particular area. What we have seen over the years, it's almost as if it's a competition to see which writer can write the best question or the harder question for the children. So what we are seeing at present, questions that used to be in section 3, which would have been the slightly more complicated questions with part A and part B, depending on the answer that you received, part C depending on B, part B depending on A, we are now seeing section 3 questions filtering into section 2. Section 2 questions that would take probably about a minute or so, they are now filtering into section 1, which would have generally been a mental question that you would do in your head, and now they have to put pen to paper in order to complete section 1 questions, all right, which is about 20 questions. We have a situation where the writers have brought in secondary level questions into the primary school. And if the general person, the general John public person picks up an SCA paper, they are not going to be able to simply do that paper at the snap of a hand.
But, sorry, is that, so are those changes being communicated to the teachers and the principals so that they can change their delivery to prepare the students for those changes, or is it happening arbitrarily?
Well, we do not have a say in what questions come onto the paper because the questions come from CXC. However, a couple of years ago, we would have had CXC coming in to take a look at how children are working with the questions. And I remember speaking to one of the persons who came in from Barbados, and I said to her, why are the questions becoming so difficult in certain sections? And she said, you have to ask the writers of those questions. Most of the writers of the questions come from secondary schools, but we have some primary school teachers who also write the questions. And when they write those questions, they are bound not to share, but those primary school teachers teach in a school. So if they write a question, they are therefore going to ensure that the children in front of them know how to answer those questions. And if you have several teachers in a particular school writing questions and marking the SCA paper, you're going to find that after a particular number of years, they have a cadre of questions that they know are going to be coming for the exam, and those questions repeat themselves. So those particular schools have a leg up already before their children even write the exams, because they know that these are the kinds of questions that are coming. And certain schools encourage their teachers to become writers. And once you are correcting over a period of years and you make your name known to CXC after a period of time, you can write the questions. And so that is something we need to look at. So I am saying that we need to look at why the questions have become so difficult for placement exams. When children write the exam and go into Form 1, they are not seeing some of those Section 3 questions until they get to Form 4, Form 3, Form 4. And it should not be that we put this amount of pressure on our young students, 11 plus, at this stage in their lives.
What you've described is a recipe for inequality.
Oh, yes, it is.
And that's very disturbing. Mrs. Hicks-Rayburn, as from the principals of public secondary schools, what are you seeing coming in? What are your members telling you they're seeing coming into secondary schools?
Well,
are you seeing students adequately prepared coming into secondary schools?
You are seeing a disparity with the preparation of the students that we are getting from the primary schools into the secondary schools. There has to be, usually at the start in Form 1, we still have to do diagnostic intake so that you can assess that student's ability and see if it's in accordance with their marks from STA. That, depending on the schools which our students are placed in, of course, the performance, you have a disparity in terms of performance. What usually obtains as well, even in just government secondary schools, there's an effort to some extent, also, I would say, group students in terms of ability and work with improving students' academic performance. What I believe needs to be, or the remedy for the issues that we are facing, each school must be a school of quality. The bottom line is, it is entrenched in our system of the inequality, as it were. And that's why I started by saying, we have to be honest ourselves. I think some may say that they are very content with the system as it is, if in fact some are, benefiting from it. But I think it is the role of the principal of the school as well, and that is why the role of the association as well, for us to recognize the need or the worth of your school. And you have to lobby for your school. You have to insist on quality. You have to do what is necessary to motivate and to also work with the ministry to ensure that quality is available for your schools.
Thank you. Member Naked.
Chair, with your leave, 3 of you all mentioned that it was in the interest, financial interest. You didn't say, you haven't said who, to keep the system as it is. But I think we would like to know whose interest is it, who is benefiting financially from the system staying as it is, so that we can fix it, talking about honesty. So I would like Mr. Lumpkin, Mrs. Sipu Daniel, and Mrs. Hicks-Rayburn to address it directly, frontally, for Trinidad and Tobago to know who's benefiting financially.
So, thank you for the question, member. There are persons who write So specifically for SEA, you have those who write these mock papers, and they publish these, and the schools are purchasing them in order to do mock examinations. You have booksellers as well as publishers as well too, who will gain from it. There are persons who would sometimes give lessons, who are not teachers, who are not educators, who will also benefit from that. And then there are political gains by which you can get from it as well too. Let me, Chairman, say as well too, even though we are looking at the system and there are schools that are performing and we call them prestige schools, and if the system has to continue, they are doing excellent work, right? The majority of them. But the schools that are underperforming needs to get the resources necessary. You can't treat them all the same. And so when you have schools that benefit by having excellent results and so, because you attract sponsorship as well too, right? The sponsors, when they give off their financial contributions, they want something in return. And it is usually in the public's eye that they are sponsoring these schools that are doing well. You would hardly ever get a sponsor going into, it happens, but you would hardly get them going into these underperforming schools because they have no mileage or little or no mileage to get from it. So even in that aspect as well too, the ministry is seeking to have sponsorship of schools and having the private sector work with the ministry. However, we have not seen any gains by it thus far. And we are quite aware that the big corporations are more willing to go into those schools that are supposedly the prestige schools as well. So even that is, even though it may not be financially directly sometimes, in order for you to get that fame and glory, you will look at those as well too. So those are some of the areas that entities benefit by having this system continue.
I think Member Singh had a follow-up question just before we go back to Member Nakid.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a follow-up question I wanted to ask. Just for my own clarification, are you all also representing the denominational school principals and teachers? Or is it that you all are representing, and this is for the primary and secondary school arrangement?
Yes, our association is the umbrella organization for both denominational and government-run schools. There is as well an offshoot, APAS, which there is an association specifically for denominational schools.
Right. I would like to know, all those schools within your purview, are all of you all using the same curriculum of teaching for students?
Correct, yes. Which is provided by the MOE.
Right. And the last question, in terms of all of these, because we've been hearing about the concordant, and we've been hearing about the 20% and all of that, who has the intake and whatnot. Who pays all of the salaries for all of the teachers in all of the schools, whether it be private, public schools, government schools as we call it, or the denominational schools? Who pays the salaries of all of the members?
The government pays the salary of all of the members.
Right, so if the...
But may I also, there are some instances where individual schools are able to make arrangements to have payments for teachers, or who, if there's a gap or there's a vacancy, arrangements have to be made sometimes. They are, as far as possible, to have a teacher come on temporarily, let's say, and a school may try to get that assistance from an alumni. They may get an assistance from their PTA as well, because they have to take steps to ensure that students are being taught. And unfortunately, there are a significant number of gaps of vacancies. And as much as the ideal, it is less than ideal that we are facing. And you have to sometimes take that initiative to allow for teaching to continue.
Right, and you all would say that more times than others, this really happens in the denominational schools where there's as Mr. Lumpkin said, the schools with abundance of resources, a good alumni or people of prestige and whatnot in terms of where resources go. Because what we've heard here today is that it's not an even playing field. And students, children are being categorized by standing, by geographic location, in terms of some schools calling themselves prestigious schools, and then some schools being sidelined, if you want to call it. The point here, and I think our chairman in his starting, said it, and some of you said it, we have to be honest, and I think it's time that we look at the legislative arrangements that guide our education system. I think if the government, the taxpayers are paying all of the members and all of the schools, it should be a level playing field. And I think, do you all agree that it's time to review all of the arrangements in terms of our education system? Because, Chairman, I'm a product of a government school, then called Couva Government Secondary, now called Couva East Secondary. And I could tell you, and I want to share this experience. I went back after I became a member of this parliament in wanting to give back to the school of my alumni and the school of my secondary school life. And I wanted to go back to that school because I know that the school had challenges. Labs were not functional at some point in time. Even today, I think that particular school doesn't have a hall for graduation purposes. Children are called out to stand up in the hot sun every morning for the open session, orientation, whatnot. And I specifically remember going back to that school, wanting to contribute in some projects in the school. And a teacher who was acting principal told someone to tell me, well, we don't take contribution, especially from politicians. I found that to be very offensive because here you have schools that, the prestigious schools, accept corporate responsibility and corporate social contribution. So I don't know if this was a one-time case, I'm not sure, but could you all just shed some light in terms of that, in terms of government schools accepting corporate responsibility and so on?
I would want to say that I am a bit confused as to why they would not want to accept it. No school is political, and you can accept from any corporate sponsor willing to adopt the school or to assist the school. However, if in the acceptance of that sponsorship, they have to align themselves to a political party, they will not be able to do so, but they can accept on the basis of a personal level. It doesn't have to be that you are making this contribution on behalf of a political party. Because if you ask them to do that, then they may have to step back a bit. However, once you are making that contribution as a regular citizen, as a past student, as an alumni, then there should not be an issue in accepting. But I want to just point out, as we all know, there are issues. The urban versus the rural, the economic barriers, all right? So in the urban and the rural schools, the urban schools will get a lot of sponsorship. There are persons around who will just go up to schools and say, I want to exercise my corporate responsibility and I'm gonna help you with a project at your school. So those schools, you would find that they do not lack resources. They have an abundance of resources, they have an abundance of infrastructure upgrades that the ministry does not have to take responsibility for, versus what is happening in the rural areas, as Mr. Lumpkin would have indicated. Corporate wants to be associated to success, and the more you gain success, the more you will get. And even the Minister of Education, in one of her speeches, said that she's going to try to see how best corporate could assist the schools that are not sponsored as well as they could be. Economic barriers, the lower income families struggle with school expenses. And as a result of that, simple things like books and school uniforms and transportation becomes an issue. There are stories that principals could tell you. There might be 2 uniforms in the home, and there are 4 children. So 2 get to go to school today, and the other 2 will get to go to school tomorrow because they have to share the uniform of the school. All right, we're looking at the digital divide.
I'm going to actually put a pause because we're going down a road here. We could go on forever. Let's focus on the professional development part of it, and we can continue into the INSEAD's paper, please.
Mr. Lumpkin, tutor submission stated that teachers are not provided with the opportunities for continuous professional development. But the Ministry of Education had a different view on it. And in one of our committee meetings on November 27, 2024, they spoke about teacher training and continuous professional development. Give us an assessment on why these differing statements.
Thank you very much.
Welcome.
The Ministry of Education does provide training. To us, it's inadequate. It doesn't always address what is taking place in the classroom. Sometimes it's too far and in between. Now, we encourage our members to access any professional development because we as tutor, we have a professional development committee that provides professional development to schools. Every school is encouraged to have a professional development day every term, in which when you do your assessment of your curriculum and other areas that you have the professional development. So tutor would provide that sort of support to our members. The ministry usually has their development courses during the vacation period. And we encourage our members, let me say firstly, we encourage our members to access it. But there are members who, during their vacation, would have family commitments that would not allow them to. And so there have been in the past where the ministry was forcing persons to access it, saying that they have to, which in itself is a sort of a barrier. If you encourage and you show the benefits of the courses that you're providing, then you would have persons more access it. But the fact that it is sometimes not in an alignment as what is taking place. So one of the courses that tutor would normally reach out to our members for is classroom management. And as you realize, classroom management is an important factor in when you deliver the curriculum, because you need to have a certain level of oversight of what takes place. If the children are disruptive and so on, then it will be a barrier to learning. So that's one area. But the other areas in terms of the ministry, now, quite recently, we have been privy to the teacher development unit under Dr. Kronberg, and she has been putting out a number of courses for the members, one being AI and the use of AI in the classroom. We are saying, and we agree with the ministry, that you cannot hide from it. It is within our system now, and proper use of AI in a teaching tool is necessary. So we support in that area. But in the past, so while we recognize the ministry attempting to bridge that gap and to improve in terms of their teacher development unit, in the past, they were insufficient and the courses were not in an alignment for best practice for the majority of our members.
Member Singh.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And just going back to challenges contributing to student underperformance, and it dealt with some of the things you all would have raised already. Tutor, your submission mentioned that socioeconomic factors such as poverty and social inequality can significantly affect educational outcomes. Is there any collaboration with the Ministry of Social Development and Family Services to assist parents and by extension students regarding these barriers?
We know that there is a level of interaction between the two ministries. We are not seeing the level that will sufficiently make any contribution. When I was a principal, before I came into tutor's office, and we had, well, the area I came from, we have our socio-economic challenges. And in trying to get some of the students and the parents to get access, it was a little bit difficult to get that. We also found that, well...
What were the reasons they gave you why it was difficult? What were the challenges you were facing in accessing?
We weren't given reasons. We would reach out, and sometimes they say, well, we are working on it. And that's the level of response we would get from the officials. We also know that through the Student Support Services Division, which has the social worker, would attempt to. But one of the challenges that I personally faced is that when my social worker would have resigned from that position, I did not get one to fill that gap, even up until, I keep inquiring, the ministry says you have someone assigned to the school. Since that time to when I left, I never met my social worker. So to us, there are gaps. I usually use, sorry to use a religious analogy. In the Bible, it says, when you're giving alms, the right hand must not know what the left hand is doing. And I feel in government services, they take it too literal. Because we have, even though we're looking at social services, when we look at national security, when we have been making representation to have TTPS, the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service, assist Ministry of Education, sometimes it's difficult. It's as if PS to PS, or even minister to minister, there's no sort of collaboration and interaction. So in the same thing with social services, the children who are getting school feeding, there should be some nexus to those who are getting, or who require and access social services. So sometimes when you build your list and you look at the children who are getting and those who indicate that they are getting social services, it sometimes don't match. And you try to, as much as possible, when they come with the forms, because we have to sign off on it. I have had one instance where the school didn't sign off and the child was getting the social services. It is alleged that the parents were going to the community center and the medical staff there was signing off, although we are supposed to put attendance as well too in that, because part of getting these social services, you have to have constant attendance at schools. I don't know how they got around that. And that is, just an example of.
So what you're talking about, it seems there's a lot of siloed initiatives taking place, and not the kind of audits one should expect. Is it that when because I'm sure you all have had, or continuously had, hopefully, meetings with the Education Ministry, meetings with the Ministry of Social Development, is it that when the initiatives are proposed and started, that there are any audits done with feedback taken from your groups to see if the intention of the programs are being met? Is that part of the metrics at all in terms of audits of systems to see, well, after 6 months or a year, this new program has been instituted. Is it working as intended? What are the challenges? Do these kinds of audits happen? Mrs. Scipio Daniel is shaking her head violently. No.
But let me say, Honorable Senator, up to recently, we have not had, and I'm going to be very honest with this, we have not had our statutory permanent secretary meeting. We had the cause to write the Honorable Minister to intervene. The last time we would have had a direct meeting with the permanent secretary to bring up a number of these issues, to see if there are any updates for our membership, but to also offer a level of collaboration. The last time was October of 2024. Previous to that would have been somewhere, I think, in May or June, somewhere around that time. We are supposed to have monthly statutory meetings with the permanent secretary and the staff. We have not been having that. Yes, we have met with the deputy permanent secretary responsible for human resource, Dr. Henderson Jr. We have had interaction with some of the members of the Ministry of Education. We have had fairly good meetings in individual matters, primary and secondary. But when it comes to infrastructure, when it comes to technical issues as well, where we meet the chief education officer, then it is far and too far that we are having these meetings. And so the association cannot represent its members effectively if we are not meeting with the Ministry of Education. I want to say, though, that in Tobago it's different. There is the statutory meeting with the administrator for education. We meet with the secretary, we meet with minister recently. But that level of collaboration and feedback we are not getting. So to get those sort of metrics would be like pulling teeth, because we would not get the feedback.
That's unfortunate. Member Singh, we have to expedite matters, so let's just move ahead a little more quickly. Thank you, Mr. Lumpkin.
My last question on this topic, Chairman, is really, Mr. Lumpkin, you spoke about the support services, more particularly in relation to students who experience psychological trauma from unstable home environments. How effective that social services is in relation to those types of cases?
In our estimation, it is not as effective as it should be when their cases are being dealt with, and when they are being, there are far too many cases where we do not see the type of intervention. Now, the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service has its unit that deals with those sort of interventions. We are made aware that it's allegedly that they are understaffed as well too, and the amount of cases that they have to deal with on a daily basis, the amount of staff doesn't allow for it. And we come back now to Student Support Services Division, that unit in the Ministry of Education, which lends support in those areas. Apart from special education, you have guidance officers, you have social workers. They are also under-resourced and understaffed, and I need to repeat that. That unit, which plays such a great part in the education system, at this time, they are under-resourced and they are underutilized in terms of manpower. Let me say this. Tutor attempted to meet with the Ministry of Education to find out what is the structure of Student Support Services Division, to find out where, what's the capacity of it, and other issues. We had one online meeting, and when we realized that it was not going along the lines we were requesting, we asked that the ministry reschedule with all of the necessary data. We sent the requests in writing. That was in 2023. To this date, we have not had a meeting with the Ministry of Education. We remind them about the structure and the function of Student Support Services Division. So coming back to your question, Honorable Member, when it comes to those interventions, we feel that it is inadequate at this time, and it needs more power and meat in it.
Thank you. Let me move to Member Ford, please. Thank you, Mr. Lumpkin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just before I go to my standard of questionnaire, I just want to go back to the financial interest that Member Nakit spoke about. It was identified that the persons that benefit were the writers of SEA, mock papers presenters, booksellers, publishers, lessons persons who give lessons, and so on. Right? Now, these individuals, right, they cannot operate on their own. right? So who is the reporting bodies that they will then go to in order to get these particular aspects that we're talking about approved, the approval, in order to ensure that I wrote a paper for SEA, who approves that, right? The mock presenters. So I would think that, yes, you're talking about the financial interests, but then they do not operate on their own. So there would be a body that I presume tutor, the primary school principals, the secondary school principals would collaborate and ensure how are these things presented and how we go forward from there. Any one of you all could shed some light.
In terms of access to these booklets, etc., that is done on a direct. There isn't a body that regulates as such.
When you say direct, to C-SEC Barbados?
No, they will write based on the format, right? The guidelines, the framework for the various examinations. But when it comes to the purchasing of those booklets, they usually do a direct interaction with this SEA teacher, the principal sometimes. Now, what is happening is that in preparing the student for the exam come April, teachers would usually do a number of mock examinations, right, and utilize different booklets because there are different styles sometimes, and they want to expose the child to a number of these. So there is no approval from either Ministry of Education. We as tutor, we don't get involved in that because we look at the rights of our members. When it comes to that, that is in a level of the school itself, but there's no governing body as such that will look at those papers. When it comes to textbooks, the Ministry of Education is the entity that is supposed to recommend textbooks to schools. And we all are aware of what takes place in the schools, the drawback of that. Because in recommending textbooks, one can try to get an unfair influence over those in the ministry or other bodies who would recommend textbooks. Our members have found over the years that a variety of textbooks assist in. So even though it's not in the formal book list, they can recommend these as supplementary areas to assist as well too. That in itself has its drawback as well too. And
well, what you're describing, you're being very kind and diplomatic about it. Remember, Naki raised the point earlier on who's benefiting.
yeah.
That is part of the so-called textbook mafia in the country that the Minister of Finance spoke to, putting mechanisms to break, I think, 2 years ago in the budget, which we are yet to see. Yes. But, I mean, it's part of who benefits from the education sector disproportionately, yes, and disproportionately affects families and students in the lower socioeconomic areas. And it's one of the things I can't understand, how parents buy a book, they have 3 children, and one would imagine the book adds 2 pages, and they have to buy a new book next semester because they changed the book and a new semester for a new year for another child, and it's just ridiculous. And over people have spoken about this, and it seems it's one of the strongest mafias in the world because it is seemingly impenetrable, and so many people are at a disadvantage because of this perpetuation of this textbook situation in this country. Let me go on for the member for it continue, please.
I wouldn't use the strong term that you use, Mr.
I use it because it's a mafia.
Mr. Chairman, right? But again, and it's the same thing from both primary school and secondary school, the same assessment that the president of tutor is given, that's the same gist of it. Anyone of you all would like to add?
What I would add, however, the attempt has been made by the ministry to minimize the issues with the minimal change to textbooks, and by putting a stop to or clamping down on changing of the book lists over a period of time, where you had to use the same book list over a period of 2 or 3 years. You could not change it because the recognition of the disparity or the issue of changing books, and then sometimes the book isn't used, it can be reused again. So there was an effort by the ministry to put somewhat of a stop to that.
I agree, but it is still being widely exploited.
Very true. But the other side of that, which is quite unfortunate as well, is that students are buying textbooks, or parents are buying textbooks, and sometimes the textbook is not even reaching to the school, or it's
Part
not
of the
being used.
exploitation
well.
process.
Correct.
Number 4.
And again, if this could be provided in writing, okay, the writers of SEA, the mock papers presenters, if we can get a listing of these individuals, the schools that they are associated with, Mr. Chairman, if we could get that in writing, probably supply to the committee, in order that, because again, we all talk about schools benefiting with these individuals, because again, if I am a writer or a mock paper presenter and I am teaching at a particular school, am I to share that information with other schools? But if we can get that list in writing to supply to us. I move on to my form of questioning now, Mr. Chairman. Right, continuous assessment methods. Let's go to that section in your tutor presentation. Your submission mentioned, and I quote, transitioning to continuous assessment methods rather than a single high-stakes exam would help gauge student learning throughout the educational process. And that's on your submission, page 2, question 2. Right, so 1, based on the experiences and feedback of your membership, how do you think a reintroduction of continuous assessment can help with improvement student performances?
Thank you very much, Honorable Member. Tutor has been on the record in speaking about methods of assessment, and we have been speaking about if we are looking at formative versus summative assessment. We've been also looking at assessment of learning and assessment for learning. What do these assessments attempt to get at? And so one of the things I have to stick in here as well to Honorable Member, we have not had the conversation within the country, the government, those who are involved in education, as to what is the nature and purpose of education. Is it to empower the members of the country, or is it to certify? Is it to bring them to write examinations? What is the nature and purpose of education? Once we can get that right, then the other areas will fall in line. So coming back to continuous assessment, tutor in the past, because of our representation, had no objection to the continuous assessment component back in, I believe it was 2013-14, somewhere around that. I stand to be corrected. However, the implementation of it, we had a serious problem. And I could remember I was a third vice president and sitting around the table with the then chief education officer, where they were trying to justify the use of the CAC. Now, it did not eliminate that high-stake examination completely. There was still that summative part of it that the Standard 5 child would have to write in Standard 5. However, the continuous assessment component part of it started with the students of Standard 4 and 5. In our estimation, if you are going to change an approach, if you're going to change a mindset, it should have been implemented from lower down. Standard 1, start from there. And as the child progresses and as the program progresses, you will get the teething problems. You will get how to fix it. And by the time that first set reaches Standard 5, then they would have gone through that process. That mindset would have been implemented. But the Ministry of Education simply said, and I quote what the CEO said at the time, we are attempting to pull it up by the bootstrap. In other words, from the top, and we pull it up there, not building from the bottom, go up. I can say on the offset, the writing process, which the CAC was implementing at the time, and with the change of the new administration, they got rid of all of that because they said, getting rid of completely CAC. But there were good components. The writing process, if you go through it, and the children starting from a younger age actually do it, by the time they reach to the SEA type, they would have been going through that, and it would have improved for most of them. Not all, but most of them.
Mr. Chairman, you all would have had dialogue and meetings,
Yes.
and you would have put forward your suggestions from tutor standpoint in order to benefit this whole new continuous assessment period.
Yes.
You would like to just share one or two methods that you would have recommended towards the particular committee?
As I said, the implementation should not have been at the higher level, but the lower level. Continuous training as well too, to our members, to the members of the teaching service in continuous assessment. We have been raised, and I have been in the system so long, we have been raised to do rote learning and to prepare for an examination. It is in the secondary in terms of they have that continuous assessment of SBAs and so. But at the lower level, we have to also train the implementers of it to do it effectively, and efficiently as well. So we have been making that recommendation in terms of the implementation of it and continuous training when it comes to the formative versus the summative examination.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, thank you.
We move on now to the Association of Principals of Public Secondary Schools of Trinidad and Tobago. Start with Member Naked, please.
Thank you, Chair. Mrs. Hicks-Rayburn, your submission spoke about that difficult transition, the challenges that it poses going from primary school to secondary school, which you're all aware of, and the behavioral and academic readiness of the students, or lack of. In the past 2 years, what specific challenges have you observed regarding that behavioral and academic readiness to transition from primary to secondary school?
Within the past year, I would like to broaden it, let's say, post-pandemic. And we have definitely seen change in behaviors of the students coming into Form 1 and creating a lot of challenges for our teachers, for our deans, the disciplinary procedures we have in school. Students are very unsettled, let's say. Students are very knowledgeable and very prone to the use of the cell phones, the issues that arise due to the use of cell phones or the indiscriminate use of cell phones. We have the proliferation of bullying, an increase in bullying among students, or cyberbullying as it were. And unfortunately, in general, there is this somewhat, I mean, it would have been said by some of our teachers, just a general lack of interest in learning, per se. They are more interested in social interaction, social issues, and unless you have, coming from homes where education is a very important process, where parents support or make see the need for the importance of education, we are getting the challenges of having students show that interest.
Well, keep it right here. Well, that goes to the question. If you have noticed that the students are interested in different methods of learning, what have you put in place in the last 2 years to accommodate that change that you're seeing from the students? Because not everybody will have a home where they come from a home of educators.
And that's why it's important for you to have a variety of methods. That's why it's important for us to, in this technologically sound age to have at your disposal strategies which will renown to the benefit of students who learn differently, students who do not relate or are somewhat, I would say, bored by the traditional method of talk and chalk. We need to have more resources, let's say in terms of smart classrooms, provision for technological provision such as internet, right? And programs where you allow for the student to like more interactive methods of learning.
Well, I know the chairman will ask it, so I'll ask it before. Well, have you implemented any of those? And if not, why not?
Well, I would like to pass, if you'd allow, for my first vice president to probably take that one as well, and because it varies in terms of the ability of respective schools to have based on the resources.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Through the chair, of course, and to the honorable members. I think that to answer that question, we have to go back to the question that we skirted, and because of time, we had to move on. But I want to touch on the different school types, because essentially that is where the heart of this particular issue lies. There are three main school types that we can examine in Trinidad and Tobago. There's the denominational school, there are the government schools, and then there's a very unique experiment that seems to be working with the Bishop's Trinity East, which is different in school type to either the traditional denominational school or the government school. I want to respectfully disagree with a statement that was made earlier on, which suggested that the 20% puts the high academic performers in schools. I disagree with that. The high academic performers will end up in, according to our system, the better performing schools based on their academic results. What the Concordat and the 20% allows is for the socioeconomic power to reside in particular schools. And when that socioeconomic power resides in those schools, then it affords those schools the opportunity to be able, either through assistance with the government or through their alumni associations or through the individuals that they are able to attract, to be able to afford some of these necessary equipment and technologies that will allow them the opportunity of teaching differently to our students. I think what we need to also examine is that our education system must be placed against the backdrop of what is happening in the world. And the world is moving towards skilled-based and skilled acquisition in terms of moving forward. And that is something that we must examine as we look to modify and change our education system in accordance with what is taking place on the world scene. So therefore, fundamentally, what we started with when our chair read that very damning report, there's where everything really resides. So that you're talking about schools that are unequally yoked because of, as we said, the sponsorship. It's not so much sponsorship, but it is the ability to attract, that financial support because of who your clientele may be. And fundamentally, we have to go back to the very heart of our educational structure if we want to change that. But I want to say this. If we need to be brutally honest, that's the first thing. We need to be brutally honest, not just honest, brutally honest. And what that requires and speaks to is a political will to change what has to change, because it's not going to change by us simply meeting here and discussing these things. What needs to happen is the legislative support to make the changes if we believe that those changes are indeed necessary. And I think through our discourse this morning, we recognize that it is indeed necessary. Therefore, we have to have that political will to make the change.
But to be fair, Mr. Simon, is it? While I agree with you fully, but we keep saying we have to be honest. We have been honest for decades. These are not new issues we're raising. These paradigms have existed for decades. It's not about being honest at this stage. It's have someone having the courage to make the changes as opposed to living with the status quo, which is part of our long colonial history. My child better than yours because my child going to X school and your child not going to X school, so I feel better about my family than yours. Those types of structural, societal systems need to be broken. I agree partly by legislative change, but partly also by ordinary citizens standing up and demanding the change. You know, Member Singh, or Member, are you finished, Member Nakhead?
Yes, I am.
Okay, Member Singh, go ahead, please.
Before we move,
Yes,
I just want
go
to
ahead.
pick up on one comment that Principal Simon mentioned. Legislative change. Could you identify let's say the two most important in your years of experience?
I mean, I would just stick with one.
Okay,
And let's deal with the Concordat.
All right.
All right, the Concordat, which has been in place for so long. I have always felt that if we are speaking about the Concordat and we don't necessarily want to touch it because of the significance and the power of religion, why not take it from the other end and liberalize the system to allow government schools the ability to be able to operate differently, to operate almost, if not just as the schools that are denominational schools are allowed to operate. And I do wish to, I totally agree.
What do you mean by that? Because government schools, if the model is there, we know what breeds success. We know what systems breed success. It's resources, it's well-trained teachers, it's students who have the support at home. We know what the formula is. We have a general idea of what the formula is. So what is not happening in the government schools? Because the government schools have the might and support of the state.
Do they? But interestingly enough, let me just answer that question very simply by saying, and that's why I outlined the three different school types. There's a fundamental difference in terms of how government schools are allowed to spend money, to be able to acquire resources, as opposed to a denominational school. Now, I do not wish to convey the idea that denominational schools are sitting on a golden egg, because all schools in Trinidad and Tobago, every single school in Trinidad and Tobago is privileged really in terms of the resources that we have available. However, I'm speaking about the liberalization of that particular system, which says that a government school has to go through the normal system of getting 3 quotes from your suppliers before you are allowed the opportunity of procuring services or goods, right? That is not necessarily the case. So there are numerous differences between how schools operate. And it may seem, as I said, I just want to focus on that one, because that one is at the heart of the problem. The ability to just write a check and have something come to you because you have the backing of a board, as opposed to having to go through 3 quotations and you know the drill where that works. You have entertained suppliers so often that they get fed up of seeing you, especially if you don't use them. So sometimes it's difficult even to get a quote from them to
While I
be able to
understand your
make your
sentiment,
thing.
that's there for a check and balance because we have a history of corruption in this country. And free sheet sometimes facilitates corruption. So while I understand the expediency of what you're talking about, there need to be checks and balances so people don't exploit gaps in the system and facilitate corruption.
I am fully aware of that, and we fully support that, because I think that the system allows for that, because all schools, the government schools, have to undergo a very rigorous audit that is done by the Ministry of Education. So if there are those gaps, then the audit will, of course, identify those gaps, and a principal will have to be held accountable for those gaps. So I'm very aware of that, and I understand the need for that. All I'm doing, though, is listing the difficulty with the system as it currently exists. And the school types, that is what fundamentally answers the question I was asked by the Honourable Member.
We appreciate the clarity. Member Singh?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just going to underperformance of students at CSEC. Your submission indicated that fewer students are leaving school with the expected goal standard of 5 subjects, including English and Math. For 3 out of the last 5 years, in fact, less than 50% of the students doing the CSEC exam left school with 5 subjects that include English and Math. In 2021, it was 47.03%. 2022, 43.66%, 2024, 45.55%. CAPE, on the other hand, continues to trend in a positive direction. In both Units 1 and Units 2, the pass rate continues to be in the 90s in most disciplines. Given the positive trend in the SEA results with fewer students scoring 30% or under, what would you say are the key factors contributing to this gap in performance when these students transition to CSEC, where less than 50% have been obtaining the gold standard of 5 subjects, including English and Math, over the past 3 years?
I'll just give an introductory statement, and then I would like to pass to our Secretary, Ms. Patricia Pitt. I think we can fully agree that in terms of students' ability to perform at the level of the issue of numeracy and literacy that we are facing, there are distinct challenges with students' ability to comprehend, basic comprehension. And I think that speaks to us as educators, finding the formula, finding the recipe to reach students at their respective levels. We have to be more creative with what resources we have. We have to be mindful of the type of child we are treating with. And the system, the traditional system, where curriculum is generalized for each student, there needs to be a greater individualization for be able to treat with individual needs of the respective children. And there we have to explore new methods, especially technology, the AI technology as well, are things which we have that we need to be making greater use of. All right, so I would, if it is, Ms. Patricia Pitt can also comment on the trends that we would have identified.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam President, and through the chair. In terms of the secondary level, one of the key factors that's impacting underperformance at the CSEC level includes the fact that for a number of our students, the level of interest in what is being offered at the school is not there. So you would have students coming to school and they are disengaged. And as a consequence of that, the staff, teachers struggle to get them.
So let me
Yes.
interject and ask a question. You raised a quite interesting philosophical question. When I was in school, half the class was disinterested too. We didn't feel as much. So what's the difference?
And sir, could I share with you that you would not have failed as much because you had parents at home who told you that failure was not an option for you.
So that's the different factor.
That is the difference, exactly so. And so that's another key factor that we're looking at, parental involvement, parental ownership of the spaces where their children are attending school, so that you don't get that sense that for all schools, and we keep talking about the same thing over and over, the fact that there are some schools that have, I mean, you can have something at a school and hundreds of parents are there simply because it is that school.
And the non-national
Yes.
schools have stronger parent-teacher
They
groups.
do. They have that kind of support. Another thing that also causes the issue is the lack of staffing at schools. There are a number of vacancies at our schools. And due to the process, the kind of snail pace of the process that the TSC uses, you literally have schools where there are no teachers.
So the last session, this issue came up, and we sought to get a bit more granular information on what this means by a deficit of teachers in terms of some sort of quantification of it. Because when we heard last week, some schools have no teachers. I found that
Yes.
very surprising. That
Well,
schools
when you
could
say no
actually have
teachers, it's no
teachers.
for certain subject areas.
Right, well,
not
that's
that
a
they have no
different
teachers.
statement, because
Correct.
no teachers is no teachers.
Yes, correct,
Right,
yes.
so no teachers for certain subjects is something different.
Yes, yeah.
And I asked the question, and I'll ask it again. Are there particular subject areas that are showing up in terms of trends that there is a shortage or a deficit of teachers in those areas that needs to be looked at as an urgent matter? We're talking about the issues with numeracy and literacy, and we're seeing the data pointing in a particular direction. So is the teacher issue being quantified, or can you quantify it for us this afternoon in terms of what that's looking like? Is it a 30% deficit? Is it in particular areas, particular schools? How can you give us more clarity on that?
We don't have that kind of information, but I can tell you that it is there. There are, especially in the TechVoc areas, it is really terrible there. Right now, there are a number of schools where teachers were sent on contract to deal with the TechVoc areas, like cosmetology, technical drawing, that kind of thing. And those contracts right now have not been renewed. And as a consequence of that, there are children at schools right now are waiting to do their CVQs, and they have no teacher. So the internal verification has been slowed down.
Okay, so
Yes.
we have three significant groups before us today. Tutor, the National Primary Schools Principals Association, and the Trinidad and Tobago Association of Principals of Public Secondary Schools. The three bodies, I would imagine, have significant remit over a large number of educators in the country, correct?
Correct.
Is it impossible for you to collaborate and come up with some sort of data point as a reference, even as a starting point? Because not knowing is the inability to fix it. The absence of data and just saying, well, there is a deficit, a shortage, in the absence of the ministry giving us that information, which sometimes is like pulling teeth to get, how can you all, as concerned citizens, come together and get that data? Because your membership is who we're talking about.
Could I pass this, Madam President, could share what APS is presently doing in
We
that
can't
regard?
always be looking, and I understand the default in looking to the state and the government for the data because they have the most power and resources. But you also have power. Yes. You also have resources. You have a membership that can give you feedback.
So,
Chair, the association is fully aware and has been attempting to gather data, and it is unfortunately some membership, depending on, we are not always able to get from our 100%, because of course we do not even have 100% in terms of membership of all the secondary schools, but there is a continued effort as well to engage the ministry with regards to or having an audience with the ministry. And we see the need for our association, even in its current paradigm, to we are reviewing even how our association is the systems of our association to allow for even greater collection of the data. There needs to be we are, unlike tutor, who given the time, or if we recognize that in our association, there needs to be a greater amount of time allotted to members of the executive to engage in the gathering of this data, this very important data, as well as to engage the ministry. Because that has to be the, as you said, from that information, we are able to better engage with the ministry and to come along with the recommendations necessary.
Thank you. Mr. Namkin, you wanted to comment?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And we are committed to working with our colleagues in the Principals Association to get the data, so we'll commit to that. However, one of the challenges that the both associations will face is the fact that they are uncertain of the established positions within their schools. So whatever data we get would be an approximate to what is in the schools, more so in the secondary schools. So if you take, for example, I'm just saying, mathematics, in a particular school, they may think that there's supposed to be in the establishment 3 mathematics teachers, but whereas, in fact, it's probably 2. So that is one of the inhibiting factors, but we will attempt to get the data based on the information that the schools have.
How much is teacher absenteeism contributing to this issue? Or is it? People are shaking their heads affirmatively in the back. So the back row is all doing this. So let's have a comment on that, because there's the phenomenon of the absence of teachers, or the position not being filled. The other issue is teacher absenteeism, and whether teachers who are supposed to be in classrooms and in classrooms when they're supposed to be there. So how much is that contributing to the issue? Everybody toss the football to the next person.
Significantly, as much as teachers are entitled to leave, 14 days sick, 14 days occasional, we do find that teachers are taking their leave, and it is, as much as they're entitled to it, there are some days where you have classes unsupervised, maybe 50%, sometimes 75% of the time.
Well, it's not a management and a disciplinary issue, and I'll give you a scenario, and why I asked the question, because I had an experience some years ago doing some research with some colleagues from outside of the country who came to do academic impact of teacher efficacy and math anxiety. And we were able to get into 20 schools, 10 denominational schools, and 10 government-run schools. And we got permission to go into the schools to do the scan, to administer the instruments. And all the schools knew day to day when we were coming. They knew the times we were coming, they knew what we were coming for. And I will tell you, every one of the denominational schools we went to, teachers were in class, waiting for us, students ready, attentive. And out of the 10 government-run schools, 7 of the teachers were not in the classroom. Principal did not know where they were, and they were expecting us. So at some level, teachers have to take responsibility, and principals. And I guess supervisory, the school supervisor, something is going wrong with the disciplinary system, because this is not somebody who is on leave. This is somebody who was supposed to be in the classroom at that time and nowhere to be found, with primary school students unattended for 3 hours. Who's going to be blamed for that? The government? That is where tutor comes in, national secondary school principals come in, and National Primary Schools Association comes in. Because you have to take responsibility for your membership also, and their performance and their dedication and diligence. You can't blame the government for that, or can you?
We understand that professionalism is key to the running of our schools, and what we seek to do as an association is to ensure the professional development of administrators. We recognize the importance of monitoring and managing, and the importance, all of that redounds to as well leadership. There needs to be constant training of administrators, but there are limitations as to you can only work with, the hands you're dealt at times. And therefore, there are instances where teachers are absent.
Madam, this is 7 out of 10 schools.
What, primary schools or secondary schools?
Primary schools.
I can't speak for primary schools.
Primary schools. And I'm making this up. Yeah. It was actually embarrassing because the people I was working with came from out of the country and they were expecting a certain level of professionalism in the schools. So it also ended up in the report that the students were unsupervised in 7 out of the 10 schools.
So if I may, Dr. Richards, I will speak on the standpoint of tutor. Tutor always encourages our members to be punctual and to be regular at school because of the nature of the job which we provide. Students, molding minds. You spoke about the disciplinary part of it, monitoring as well too. We also have to take into account as well, in some instances, not all, job satisfaction. Is job satisfaction playing a part in some of these instances?
So I'm dissatisfied with my job. So I drop the ball and I don't perform my duties.
There's where the support needs to be in terms of not only the union, but also the Ministry of Education. And I know that they have employee assistance programs. But in our society, if someone reaches out for assistance in whatever area, more so in terms of mental health, and you know that is a big part is playing now in not only the teaching service, but throughout our society. You are stereotyped, you're branded a certain way, and it's something we have to change as a society as well, so that if teachers are struggling with their performance, there has to be a mechanism that will, one, intervene in a way that is not deemed to be undignified as well. So we can't say exactly what were the factors affecting those schools. And yes, in terms of punctuality and regularity will play a part in some instances in terms of how the curriculum is delivered and the support for the students. We will not discount that particular issue. But if it is that we are finding that there are a number of schools who are having this issue of not coming to school, then some intervention should be put in place. And, you know, it requires probably a soft approach in the first instance, and then require the legislation and, you know, getting the disciplinary process in. When it comes to the days of the leave, we always, at all our professional development courses and at any intervention, is that those leave were negotiated for a reason, not to be abused, especially occasional leave, which is unique to the teaching service. We have constantly reminded persons that when you have to utilize these leave, it has to be for good reasons, even if it is in a mental health issue that you have to take a day away. But when you do as well, you have a duty to ensure that the students are also engaged. So if you know in advance, because sometimes emergency happens, but if you know in advance, you can plan and ask either the principals or your teacher next to you that I am leaving this work for them to be occupied, and so these are the areas we encourage our members. And then when you return from your leave, you make up for, which a lot of our members do. I'm not making excuses, but I am quite aware a number of them do that so that they try to bridge that gap when they take their leave. We never encourage abuse of leave. And I tell you, permit me, Chair, I know of one instance of an educator for over a decade, probably going into 2, who have been on sick leave, constant sick leave in a primary school, such that the staff started to complain that because you have not exited the system, on paper you are still on staff. So the principal has to assign you a class. But knowing over the years you are not showing up, that principal did all the paperwork, sent it in, and somehow the paperwork ends up in a black hole. Ministry has not initiated any sort of investigation or any sort of disciplinary. And if someone is constantly on sick leave, they should be presented before the medical board. But that has not been happening. So in some instances, when you have that case, the administrators are doing what they can, but somehow it's not being attended to.
HRRCs. Mrs. Hicks-Raven wanted to comment, and then we want to move quickly to
Yes,
Member
I
Ford
wanted
and then
to.
Member Naked, so we can move to try and get through as much as possible.
Yes, sir. As much as we said, teachers are entitled to their leave, we have to also indicate that there are some who abuse it. So the system really seems to be, it's a bureaucratic system, and many principals are doing what they are supposed to do in terms of reporting issues of abuse of the system, where there are sometimes you are writing, you are reporting considerably over a period of sometimes a year, 2, you are creating a file for individuals, and yet that is not dealt with in a timely manner. And individuals who you know very well, who are not reporting to work, but sometimes reporting elsewhere, or may have different forms of, different allegiance and so on, but the system allows for it, and therefore you can only do what you are supposed to do in a timely manner, reporting, informing the employer, and really that needs to be dealt with. There needs to be a greater part on the ministry. There needs to be a greater part on even Teaching Service Commission to treat with disciplinary issues and incidents.
And of course, all these things end up affecting student performance because they're not exposed to the curriculum, because there are huge gaps in these systems, and we tend to only look at the student performance as opposed to the systemic performances. Member Ford and then Member Naked.
Again, and as a result of the feedback you all are giving us, what's the resignation rate of a teacher?
We don't have that data, but that is something which
But teachers resign.
Yes, you have
For
teachers
various
resigning.
reasons they would resign, but we can't say the
So
statistics.
no
for that.
statistics on
I
reasons and the amounts.
And those are,
and so
all
on.
of these are things that, data that we really need to collect and to do.
I don't understand how organizations like yours are not privy to this kind of data. I just don't understand how you operate in a realm in today's world, making decisions without data.
Chair, the Association of Principals of Public Secondary Schools is a voluntary association.
I'm not blaming you.
No, but it needs to be stated, and I keep making, unlike tutor, we are in our schools 100% of the day, and we, most of what we do would be, after hours and so on, and yet we are able to, and that is why we recognize the importance of the evolution of the association. It is necessary, we are approaching the ministry, we need to have greater time, because once you invest in the administration, once you invest in leadership, a lot of the issues that we are grappling with are going to change.
Understood. Number 4.
Yeah. Effectiveness of suspensions and other disciplinary measures. Again, Your submission highlighted that suspensions are not a measure that is used to curb truancy. Detention is used only if the child is truant with respect to being at school, but not in the classroom. What is referred to as breaking class, right? And again, that's in the submission on page 10, question 2. And one of the questions to you at this time, how effective has the use of detention during break periods or after school been in addressing truancy at the secondary school level?
Unfortunately, there has been a limit in terms of how effective because of non-buying by parents. One of our biggest challenges is when you are trying to dispense with discipline, or when you are trying to put strategies in place to treat with some of the issues we are dealing with, that particularly of, let's say, breaking classes and so on. In order for you to have a system put in place, it would require usually teachers additional time. You're asking teachers to give of extra time where teachers are not obligated to be, to see after a student. A teacher's lunch period, they are not obligated to be engaging with a student at that time, nor are they obligated to deal with students after school. At 2:30, when the bell goes, a teacher does not have to be there. And moreover, we have to be mindful that even in this society, at this time, safety is important for students. So even if you want to, say, give after-school detention for a period of time, that has to be structured, it has to be supervised. You have to get the parents' permission. You're not just going to enact something like that and then who is going to see after and who is going to monitor and supervise. But we have found you have to make, engage your teachers as much as possible, some who are willing to give of that time. We have to, we cannot ignore, or you have to appreciate what a teacher is doing or giving of the time to solve these issues. But it's the parents as well. Some parents are telling you flat out, they are unable to, they do not agree with the child staying back, let's say after school, or realistically as well. Based on where...
Times have really changed.
Yes, it is. Based on where children live.
Wow.
Right, depending on what areas a child may come from. You cannot allow a child to leave.
During my time in school, detention
was the order of the day.
A main order of the day. So when my parent or whoever come to pick me up after school, they have to wait until my detention time is up. I remember that distinctly.
That's your parent. Remember Naked?
Wow.
I'd like to keep that same trend to you, Mrs. Scipio Daniel, about the ineffectiveness that you stated of suspension and detention in the primary schools. Can you elaborate on how suspension and detention is used ineffectively?
Thank you, Member Naked. Through the chair, of course. We have our suspensions if a child violates one of the various rules according to the, what do we have it? Discipline matrix. So in the discipline matrix, we have minor, major, and severe offenses. And all schools are to follow that discipline matrix based on the first offense, second offense, third offense. And we do follow the discipline matrix. We do the suspensions, do the report, send it up to the ministry. But again, in terms of having repeat offenders, there are certain schools that do have the repeat offenders. And a main driver of that is the socioeconomic position of the child, their home environment, the parental support. Sometimes you call the parent in for conferencing to see how best we can curb the behavior. Some parents do not come. And even those who do come, many of the times you hear from them, I don't know what to do. And they seem to throw their hands up into the air. So we have student support services on hand to help, to assist the guidance officer and the social workers. But again, we are coming into the realm of they are understaffed and undersupported. So when we heard the data from the Ministry of Education themselves, we recognize that at present, there are at least 350 persons lacking from student support services. And these are just the general members in terms of guidance officers, social workers, and special ed officers. We have also a great need for student aides who would assist children with their individual educational plans and so on. And you find that the children who are truant, they might be the same ones who have issues with reading, or they are having so many problems at home. Home is not a space where education is promoted as we would have seen in years gone by. No matter what you do, you have to go to school and learn your work. But now it is not so. We're seeing that many of the children who went to school and did not learn their work, they are having children. And the children are having more children. And so what would have been a standard at home in the past no longer obtains. And so when you call in the parent to speak with them, they are not coming. And then there's no change in the behavior other than what we can try to do at school. So if a teacher takes a special interest in that child and pulls them close, but how many children can we take and pull close to you every day? We are seeing more and more children are coming out with behavioral issues. And unless we have the student aides assigned to each of these children to assist the teacher in the classroom of 30, sometimes 35 children, we are left at a crossroads where they misbehave, we suspend, they stay home for a little while, they come back, and they misbehave again, and the cycle continues. Our hands are tied.
It's called the cycle of educational poverty in the ghetto. Parents don't have jobs, they can't, even if they have, they can't attend the schools.
Because they are working to put
they're
food on
working
the
to put food on
table.
the table, 2 and 3 jobs.
Correct.
So I'm very much aware. Bless
So I'm
you.
making a plug for student support services, especially for the aides for the children, because if we have someone who is dedicated to a particular child, then that child has a better chance of success in the school system.
Mr. Lumpkin, if I can.
Mr. Chairman, if I may include as well too. Suspension is an area that is supposed to remove the child who threatens, whether by health or by physical or otherwise, removal temporarily from the school's environment in order to temporarily deal with the threat. When we suspend, and suspension should be in most of the cases last resort, there must be interventions leading up to that, progressive interventions. We can't just suspend. If it is that the child is violent, well, yeah, there are some instances. However, the course of action after suspension is important. There must be some form of remediation with that suspension. Because in our society now, you take the child out of the school environment, you send them home. What are the influences outside of there during the school hours that may actually bring the child to worse behavior, bringing them back into? So there must be some reformation. Having the child attend some institution or some level of support to try and reform the child. We don't have that now. We suspend, send them out, and whatever influences out there, that is upon them. One of the inhibiting factors, and my colleagues in the principalship will tell you, the process of suspension, it is a voluminous document, have to be done in triplicate. And that in itself is a drawback, because when you have to do, and we understand the need to have the necessary paperwork, But that in itself can be looked at as well. And so some principals may not want to have to go through that and have to go through all of that documentation at that level. I mean, granted, there should be documentation as you go along, but that in itself has become an inhibiting factor for some of our colleagues. But the fact remains, if you are suspending, not in terms of medical, there should be this necessary support for rehabilitation of that child. Thank you.
If I may, Chair, just to add to Mr. Lumpkin, this is why we need a dedicated social worker, guidance officer, and special ed officer attached to each school. Each school needs that. Right now we have one social worker, guidance officer, and special ed officer attached to probably 7, 8, 9 schools. And when you look at the school population of 300, 400 plus, or even if it's just 150, it is too much. The workload is too much for that one person to deal with. We need persons assigned to each school.
Mrs. Scipio, Daniel, you're preaching to the choir.
We
all know about the
Yes.
significant under-resourcing of student support services as much as their workload continues to increase. Member Naked.
Yes, to Mrs. Hicks-Rayburn. We spoke about the suspension, detention. It flows right into one of your submissions, spoke about the criminal gang activity in schools. And it was adverse with what the Ministry of Education came out and said on November 27th as well. They felt that there have been no reports of any gangs in our school system. But you made the submission that there was. And can you elaborate on that? And just to give everyone, there's a report that came out today about St. Joseph Secondary School and how the infrastructure was so poor, the rat infestation and so. Now I know that catchment area very well. Right next to that school is it's a hot spot for crack cocaine users, and right there. As a matter of fact, several videos were made on that school. And the enrollment has dropped from 500, I understand, from the report to 100. And it goes to what the chairman said. Where do those 400 students go? Do they go into gangs? Because there are gangs in and around that school. So if you could address that as well.
So we have to be realistic, and we have to appreciate that our students come from respective communities, and in certain schools where you have students, there are issues of gangs in communities, and some of these students will in fact are students in schools where they come together, and there are sometimes incidents where there's some rivalry within the schools. And it is the principals, I know, administration, one of our biggest concerns or challenges has to do with ensuring the safety and security of all on the compound, and as far as possible, keeping certain elements at bay. Although you may not have all-out rivalry, let's say, but we do have some conflict at times between students who are from differing areas. And there are sometimes within the school attempts by students to stake areas. And you have to make sure that your compound is free from that as far as possible.
Let me ask you a fundamental question. How do you know these students are involved in gangs?
So,
because everybody said they're involved in gangs. How do we know that?
based on what comes out when you have certain parent conferences as well, some of these incidents or fights that you may see occurring, when there are the parent conference at the end and we engage sometimes community police, right, the information that you get from there, it clearly indicates that there's a rivalry, and there's usually that element. Some of the issues, some of those fights that may occur as well, are as a result sometimes of, let's say, transactions that have gone awry. There are some schools where there is the sale of marijuana and drugs. You can try as much as possible to have entry protocols. We are requested to ensure our entry protocols are very sound, searches and so on. But there are times when marijuana is on the compound, there are some transactions. And students are being targeted by individuals who are being asked to sell on other members' behalf.
And the police are involved because the TTPS has reported in the past that they are as young as 9 and 10-year-olds
Yes.
who are affiliated to gangs, who are
Yes.
but gangs don't just go someplace just so. Gangs have an agenda. They're looking to make money or whatever it is and influence new membership, unfortunately. So that's what you see. They're in the schools to sell drugs.
I'm not saying that. I'm saying that is some of the scenarios and some of the reasons that you will have these issues. And interestingly enough, sometimes you ever heard about the statement, what among thieves? When you honor among thieves, and individuals will not come out directly and indicate. So they would never come out and state certain things. Well, yes. Right? So, but there is that element which we have to be extremely careful of, and which there needs to be a greater sense, even in terms of assistance with security, assistance with personnel for supervision, over the compound for the entire day, especially, hotspots and so on. We have to be very careful.
Member Nakin? That's it?
No, just one question related to that. You spoke about Mr. Ramratan from the education officer. He was very specific and very clear that he has no evidence of any gang activity in the schools. And you're saying differently.
I am saying, based on what we have in terms of parent conference, you have some instances where students, because of the communities, based on the communities, and the students are in the schools.
So how are we going to reconcile that difference from the Ministry of Education, who feels that there's no gang activity? And I personally have seen videos where there's a school fight and somebody will bring somebody from outside the school who will say he's part of that gang to intervene and influence that school, that fight that happened in school and so. So I'm just saying that there is evidence, as anecdotal, that I've seen. But how are we going to reconcile that and find a solution if the Ministry of Education stated definitively that they haven't seen any gang activity in our school system? It goes back to data. If we can find some.
We have to, based on just the information that we have, and I mean, in terms of communicating with employers, that conversation has to be had. Definitely, because we cannot ignore some of the realities of what is faced, and for the safety and security of all, we need to treat with matters, And I would like as well, it needs to be considered. I've always looked at the correlation, let's say, between the decriminalization of marijuana and the impact it has had as well on the schools. Those are areas which need a greater amount of intervention. And
thank you. Member Singh?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just following up on the question that Member Naked raised, could it be an issue where, from the school's perspective, the principals and the teachers are afraid to formally lodge complaints or make reports to the effect of fear of their own lives? Would you say that is a case where the data is not collected and reflected in the Ministry of Education's data?
We cannot, I would not be able to comment on that. I cannot say that.
Because if what we are speaking about, two conflicting pieces of information, I mean, we are as the committee here would want to know, well, where's the discrepancy or the gap in information that it has not been reflected at the Ministry of Education end as to some of the cases. And all of us have seen videos where our schools and our students, participate in activities and whatnot. And if this is not being reflected in our official data collection and our official system, then something is wrong. And that is something that we need to fix. So, and that is some of the reasons why we sought to have this committee and these discussions. In relation to just sticking with the disciplinary action of things, I know you mentioned marijuana and whatnot. I've been told a couple of times, students are taxed. You bring your lunch money and students take it away. What is the prevalence of these things happening in your schools, and what happens when that is identified? And whether it be primary or secondary? That's my last question on this matter, Chairman.
The disciplinary matrix clearly indicates what you have to do and what disciplinary procedures need to be taken into consideration when those things occur. And yes, that is an issue in some schools. And you will, of course, because some people may trivialize it as even just asking for $1 and so on. But we treat it very seriously. And the disciplinary, even if the child-parent conference, is held, and if it repeats itself, then the child may have a suspension for a period of time.
Where would that fall in the disciplinary matrix, that event?
That is taxing.
Taxing, where would that fall in the disciplinary matrix, as well as school fighting?
In terms of what, if it's major?
Where does it fall? Because you said it was moderate, severe. I think severe was the last one.
I think taxing is that more probably moderate. I can't recall exactly right now. All right, but I think it's more moderate. Fighting, of course, is severe.
Taxing is moderate.
Moderate?
Extorting my lunch and my money is moderate.
Moderate?
If I may,
if it's
Mr. Chair,
repeated, yeah.
Yes.
if I may, the disciplinary matrix and the disciplinary system wouldn't just deal with the act itself. One would also need to take into consideration if it is a repetitive action. So someone may have been engaged in an activity such as that for the very first time, and there is a particular disciplinary procedure that is going to be introduced. If that act is not reproduced by that particular individual, then one may want to deem that you've been successful in dealing with something like that. But if there are repeated acts by the same individual, then you move up in terms of the matrix and the prescribed consequences that you will apply.
But sorry, but to the chairman's point, that is how you would deal with it. But the act itself, outside of the school system, would be a criminal act. That is a criminal act.
Yeah, yes, indeed it is.
So how could that be moderate in any matrix?
Well, you're asking individuals who are not really responsible for drawing up the policies. So that is something that, again, it has to do with the collaborative effort in terms of the discussions that would take place between all the stakeholders when we draw up those policies. And just going back to one of the issues that was raised by a member, what we need in terms of the ability to deal with some of these incidents would be the collaborative effort, not only with the Ministry of Education, but with other arms, because some of the data that you are asking for in terms of gang-related, remember, as teachers, as principals, we are also bound by law to report certain incidents to the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service, and further investigation and determination of exactly what is taking place is not up to us as principals, but up to the members of that particular agency. So certainly a more collaborative effort between the different arms of our society will allow a more holistic approach as to how we can solve some of these problems.
Member Ford, we're heading to wrap up the session.
I just, yeah, a comment, any feedback may be possible. Are there presently any cross-border collaborations among the 3 associations here represented with other Caribbean partners in terms of, you know, again, coming out of the World Bank report read by the chairman earlier, right? Now, that only came out this week. But were there any prior discussions along our Caribbean partners accordingly?
Well, the Principals Association, we collaborate very strongly with our colleagues in the region, and there is the Caribbean Association of Principals, CAPS, which incidentally we have a conference that every 2 years, and we have a conference coming up in 2025. That, the article that was read by our chairman at the beginning, I would have learned of that article from my colleague in Grenada, who would have, the president of the association, who would have shared the article, and of course we engaged in dialogue on that level. And that is why it is critical that, you know, we have this collaboration. It is important for us to recognize, and some of the solutions as well for the issues, we find it through the rich collaboration as well as the need for conferences, you know, to highlight some of the issues which we will, you know, deal with on a local level.
So, and again, coming out of the same, Mr. Chairman, coming out of the same World Bank report, we are not only anticipating that it's up to the Ministry of Education now to look into this matter alone. We are anticipating that your various bodies will be involved and give the necessary inputs. Yeah, tutor and primary schools. That's a quick feedback, and I'm good, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, thank you very much. Tutor is part of the Caribbean Union of Teachers, which is a collaboration of all the majority of territories in the Caribbean. We are also part of Education International, which is the umbrella body for educational trade unions. Quite recently, we had a conversation with a member of the Principals Association in the UK, and he has been liaising with us. We haven't gotten specifically into violence and indiscipline, but in terms of benchmarks, what they do in the UK for benchmarks and evaluation as well too. So we are in collaboration with a number of bodies outside of Trinidad and Tobago.
If I could just end the session by asking a question of Mrs. Scipio Daniel and Mrs. Hicks Rayburn, related to, because we are talking about student underperformance and student performance, the issue of the remediation program initiated by the Education Ministry. My understanding is that it started off as a vacation program in response to COVID-19 and the pandemic and the learning loss, but it transitioned to a different iteration. Can Mrs. Scipio Daniel give us a sense of how she feels that is doing or that has done in terms of the impact on student performance? And then the understanding is that it may not be as widely available at the secondary level. So if Mrs. Hicks Rayburn can give some commentary on that and how effective that would be if it is available at the secondary school level.
Thank you, Chair. With your permission, I would like to pass this question to my first VP, Ms. Colleen Hayes.
Please.
Thank you very much. So I would be happy to comment, Mr. Chairman. In terms of our data that we have collected, so what the association would have done, we would have done a link, a Google form to capture some data. So what we are speaking about here would be based on the data that we collected. 80 schools of focus, and we also looked at schools that were non-schools of focus. And in terms of the schools of focus, the after-school program and the vacation revision program is what you're talking about. It showed limited success in some schools because of the poor student attendance, because we spoke about it earlier in terms of poverty, in terms of socioeconomic. You're talking about children who have to stay back on afternoons and their parents cannot afford transportation means to get them later, so they can't stay. The vacation program, yes, meals were provided for children, but unfortunately not transportation in some cases. So you're talking about parents having to find money to take these children to school during the July-August vacation. So because of that, we would have seen a low turnout in attendance. In terms of the work provided, we would have recognized that there was not a standardized format in terms of the curriculum delivery, amazingly enough, because you can't teach absent children. And when we have a low turnout, what was expected would be that the children would be given an opportunity to learn further the curriculum concepts for term 1 of the next academic year. But that couldn't take place because we didn't have that level of attendance. In terms of the trends, so remediation efforts were not sufficiently tailored to the individual student needs. And that's something that we've been talking about for the entire day. We have children who need assistance, need that extra support, need that help, especially, and we see because of this, it turns into behavioral problems at times. And the extracurricular activities such as sports and arts are underutilized as engagement tools as well. That was some of the comments that we got from our members. The inequitable distribution, which we spoke about today, of resources for the schools of focus versus the others. So when the schools of focus program was implemented in the 80 schools, those schools were given resources. They were given the resources of the social worker, of the guidance officer, as well as additional resources. But other schools didn't get that. And I heard him speak about different types of school. I'm going to emphasize about rural schools because I'm in a rural school. We tend to get no sets of resources. We don't get buy-in from corporate persons, and therefore it really is something you have to look at, the inequity and distribution of resources for primary schools. Our recommendations, though, we have to look at the remediation program a bit more. In terms of, we have to look at trying to find ways of supporting parents. The key to this whole entire issue is parental support. We need that parental buy-in. If we don't have parents getting some sort of support in terms of, I heard him speak about social services. If we don't get parents to access that social welfare grant, and it's a lot of work to get that social welfare grant in the primary school system, then we can't get parents sending the children to school. Also, you have to look at expanding in terms of incorporate sports, music, and vocational training to engage the students to reduce dropout rates as well. Again, I talked about equitable resources, distribute funding and support services. It's done on a proportion basis across all schools.
Do you have a sense of, you said the participation rate, and this has also been reported in the media, and I think from the Education Ministry, the participation rate in that program, and this is at the primary level post-COVID, right?
Yes.
Do you have a sense of what it was? Is it 30%, 40%, 20%?
Based on our data that we got from these 80 schools, well, not all 80 answered, but we had about 65 to 65 responding. They said between, the attendance was between 40 to 50% on most days, no more than that. Because again, we are looking at, you remember there are children and some of the schools, like I said, communities that you couldn't get transport easily and therefore lack of it.
And just for clarity, this program at the primary level was to prepare students who suffered learning loss for the upcoming SCA.
Yes. It was a way of trying to get children, yes, to increase in their literacy and their numeracy levels.
Okay.
So they did it after school. So they had to get teachers to run the program after school.
So was there consultation with any of these three groups in terms of the potential challenges that were eventually manifested?
Well, consultation is very interesting, an interesting word. No,
Use that pause.
don't use that word consultation. We were there. We didn't get consultation. We got a presentation of what the program was supposed to be
Some people may
like.
consider that. If you're shaking your head, we're consulting. Mrs. Hicks Rayburn, in terms of the secondary school situation, has it transitioned to that? Because, of course, some of the students would have already sat SEA. Having experienced learning loss, we all know what happened where that was concerned. Has there been any effort in that regard to bring those students at least up to some sort of benchmark performance level?
Work is being done by the schools of focus, the 26 secondary schools of focus, and resources are given to these schools on a
How were these schools chosen, and why 26?
Chairman, I really cannot tell you. We are...
So what, is a lot, well, I'm going to be disparaging.
It would
Maybe there
have
was some
been
data
based-
that pointed to these schools needing more intervention,
The
is that
ministry
it?
would have been noted, they would have taken into consideration socioeconomic backgrounds, I believe, of students, as well as certain catchment areas.
But the learning loss wasn't limited to students on the lower socioeconomic end, so I don't understand if that is the rationale. If that is the rationale, that doesn't make sense to me, because students across the board experience learning loss. So I don't, how many secondary schools do we have in Trinidad and Tobago?
123, 120.
123.
Yeah.
And 26 were the subject of the intervention. Okay.
Data based on ministry's information, schools were selected. And in terms of the remediation program, the identification program, one of the key issues, unfortunately, the students who really would have needed the intervention, because it's not mandatory, especially for for students, some of the students who really benefit from it or can benefit from it are really, unfortunately, some are not in the program.
And in this iteration, was it during school hours or after school hours also?
The vacation program.
It was vacation program.
That's the vacation program I'm referring to.
So at the secondary school level, was there also low participation? Or was it better?
It would have, I am unable to state exactly how much, but I think it was quite low as well.
And is there any indication of the impact of those who indeed participated?
I cannot say exactly.
All right. I would like to take the opportunity to thank you all for being with us today. The discussion has been quite candid and interesting in many ways. We traversed many points that have been raised for decades in the country without a lot of progress, unfortunately. The issue of the Concordat, I think there had been some sort of committee set up, if I'm not mistaken, to look at the Concordat. I think it had gone to Cabinet, if I'm not mistaken, for review in terms of the final report. We are yet to get feedback on that to see what the way forward is. There had been also a committee set up to look at the SEA as a transition placement exam. We are yet to get a report on that also, so I guess we will await these reports. If I could just have closing remarks from the team leaders at this time, quick, because we're heading to a 1 o'clock close. We're an hour over, but I think it was well worth the extension because of the information we were able to get in terms of feedback from you. So I'll start with Mr. Lumpkin.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, Dr. Richards. There are many things we can say with the education system, but we believe and we hope that this is a start, hopefully, as you said, many decades of discussion. Very quickly, in terms of that, after school, we haven't seen any educational, philosophical underpinnings for that program. And we believe that if the resources were put in place for during the school time instead of after school, because students will get tired after a certain time, they will reach a saturation point, even our teachers, and even for the vacation. So we were objecting because of that, and we don't believe after 3 o'clock the students could learn anything more. But you should put the resources during the school time to ensure that it is effective. But we want to say that tutor commits to promoting the cause of education, and we will continuously work with any authority to bring a better education system in Trinidad and Tobago.
Thank you. Mrs. Scipio Daniel.
Thank you, Chair. Just very quickly, I want to point out that a possible selection criteria for the schools of focus could be the schools that have been making below 30%. And when you consider secondary schools, there are several secondary schools where several children who would have made below 30%, they are all placed in one area, one school. And so that could possibly be one of the criteria for the schools of focus. That being said...
if that is true, that is very frightening.
Yes. That being said, the Primary School Principals Association is committed to assisting their principals in improving themselves. We encourage all principals to consistently upgrade their skills, to take part in training programs, and we ourselves try to ensure that at our meetings, our termly conferences, we bring information to our principals so that they can continuously improve. And we do wish to see the change in the education system for the better, because if we do not, it is not going to redound well for the future of Trinidad and Tobago, and we do want to see improvement and a great Trinidad and Tobago. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Hicks-Rayburn.
Thank you, Chair. The association would like to thank the Chair as well as the panel for the opportunity to be part of this Joint Select Committee, and the Principals Association continues to work with its members to work towards the professional development of its members, recognizing how difficult, increasingly difficult, the educational landscape is becoming, and the need for continued training, the need for information to inform decisions. And we are working with our stakeholders. We look forward to collaborating further with stakeholders, moreover with our employers, to help to shape and to change, make the necessary changes that are needed. We recognize the limitations, but we continue to lobby on behalf of our members and recognize the importance for the good of our nation, how perhaps underrated, but how critical it is for us to continue to work together for the development of our country.
Thank you so much. I'd also like to thank Ms. Marsha Huggins. Ms. Huggins, is that you? Can we hear your voice? You're here all day with us. We appreciate you being with us.
I was just, I mean, most of what was said, I'm in agreement with. I just want to say one thing, though. You just have to bear in mind that the school is a microcosm of our society. So whatever happens there, whether we're dealing with truancy, indiscipline, or whatever it is a reflection of what is outside there. And if we don't deal with what is outside there, it's going to be difficult for us to actually treat with what happens inside the school. So that's my only comment, but thank you for having me.
I'm really happy that I got to give you the opportunity, because we wanted to hear everyone's voice. Also, Ms. Cardine Hayes, Mr. Simon, and Ms. Pitt, thank you all for being here. We appreciate you being here with us. We'd also like to thank members of the public who sent comments and questions, many of which we would have covered in our discourse here. Members of the committee, Member Naked had to leave. He had a previous appointment. Member Ford, Member Singh, and the members who could not be with us today. I'd just like to end by just going back to the World Bank report that I referenced earlier on, and it's interesting And it really speaks to your purview, because we have here the primary and secondary schools principals and tutor. And both of the commentators in the World Bank report stress the urgent need for increased investment in education across the Caribbean, which is something you all referenced in your contributions. Interestingly enough, Levin noted that while the region spends more per student on tertiary education than high-income countries, it allocates significantly less funding to primary and secondary education. Isn't that ironic? When the foundation of tertiary education is primary and secondary education. Note to self and food for thought. I would also like to end by saying, although the committee's inquiry is looking at shortcomings in performance, we also have to acknowledge and admit that we have exercised great strides in education in Trinidad and Tobago, and the various administrations and stakeholders, including the Education Ministry, have to be commended for the strides that we've made, because we are all products of the education system, and we are not doing too badly ourselves in most cases. So I don't want to just paint a negative picture of the education sector, but we have our challenges, and that's what we have to focus on in terms of improvement. So we'd like to thank you again all for being here, and our viewers and listeners, and the stakeholders who participated today and last session, the committee members for their continued support and participation, the indispensable staff of the Office of the Parliament for your procedural and logistical support, the viewing and listening audience, and please remember to log on to the Parliament's social media websites, Instagram, Facebook, etc., for updates and information all the way through. Thank you all for being with us, and do have a great day and enjoy your carnival in a safe manner. Thank you so much. We're adjourned.